Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see the good turnout for Dr. David Montero's talk. I think it's always good to have, when there's a new professor, to come in and talk to this type of group, just to maybe inspire some collaborations down the line. It's also nice to see Dr. Martin McInnes, who's made it out. I've been harassing him for the past few weeks to make it out, so glad to see Martin's here as well. So a bit about David. David is one of the new exercise physiologists hired, as I just mentioned, and he joined the Faculty of Kinesiology just last year. And recently, since being at Calgary, he's joined the Live-In Cardiovascular Institute of Alberta. So David came from, was born in Alicante, Spain, and earned his PhD in cardiovascular physiology at the University of Avignon in France. And his research interest lies in how blood volume is impacted by various cardiovascular conditions and the role of hypo or hypervolemia in exercise tolerance. His interest in these areas was piqued because biological processes are largely unexplored, despite the fact that blood volume is an integral part of the cardiovascular system, and there are major clinical applications for his work, particularly with patients with cardiovascular and kidney disease. So in his spare time, David enjoys spending time with his family, riding his bike in the mountains, and searching for stimulating books. So given that he's been searching for stimulating books, I made some suggestions here that might be of interest to you. The first is Biomechanics of the Musculoskeletal System by Dr. Ben Onig and Dr. Walter Herzog. Another good one that I find interesting is Sports Surfaces. Biomechanics, Injuries, Performance Testing, and Installation, also by Dr. Ben Onig, Dr. Gerald Cole, and Dr. Darren Stephanician. And last but not least, Biomechanics of Sports Shoes. So if you're looking to do some more biomechanics readings, that you can come by the office and pick those up. So without further ado, I know the jokes are pretty good, eh? Dr. Montero will be talking about aerobic capacity, importance of central and peripheral adaptations.
Thank you, Mike. So I was expecting 3-4 people, students, so I will try to be a bit more academic, just for the senior people here. So I'm going to talk about some studies done in Zurich about the determinants of aerobic capacity. Okay? Some of them will be controversial, I guess, so don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, David, we don't believe this, we have other evidence, whatever, okay? And even if you don't have a background in VO2 Max, in aerobic capacity, I think anyone can understand this. My mother understands this. So again, if you have controversial questions or whatever, just stop me and we discuss. So VO2 Max, I guess most of you know, is a strong prognostic marker of cardiovascular health and life expectancy in healthy and in diseased populations. And the questions was raised decades ago about what are the determinants of VO2 max and what are the adaptations that determine the increase in VO2 max with training. So you know, oxygen in the atmosphere goes through the lungs, oxygen diffusion then transport oxygen to the blood, then to the muscle, and then it's consumed in the mitochondria. You can imagine that if I have a laboratory that is particularly looking for the lungs, maybe I have a bias to say that the lungs are very important for VO2 max and for adaptations to endurance training, okay? So this is what we found in the literature. We found that any group in general that is focused on a particular link in the oxygen transport and utilization chain claim that this link is the most important one, okay? So what we did some systematic reviews of the literature and some experimental studies trying to to see which are the main mechanisms determining the increase in VO2 max with endurance training. Endurance training, you know, is the most effective intervention to improve VO2 max in healthy individuals. Okay? So I will show you some systematic reviews and meta-analysis, some experimental evidence, and a related question related to the response to endurance training in relation to VO2 max. Okay? So first, for the systematic review, we focus on the Fick equation. So VO2 max is equal to maximal cardiac output and arteriovenous oxygen difference. Usually, this part of the Fick equation is named as the central part, cardiac output, oxygen delivery. This part here is usually related to oxygen extraction in the muscle. Okay? Even if it's not only oxygen extraction, it's also arterial oxygen delivery. Okay? But in general, these are the two main, let's say, topics in the determinants of VO2 max. Either the main determinant is of a central origin or a muscular or peripheral origin. So we included only healthy subjects, not all subjects. Endurance training intervention had to last at least 1 month. And of course, no additional intervention. And the report of VO2 max, maximal cardiac output, and arteriovenous oxygen difference. So after pulling all the studies, we saw a big effect of VO2 max of training, a big effect of cardiac output, but no effect on arteriovenous oxygen difference. Okay, Aaron? This may surprise some here. So endurance training, cycling, running, has no effect on oxygen extraction. Do you believe this? No? Yeah?
Is there any specification for methods and measuring adaptations difference, or you just start with catheters and that's the only thing that you consider, or what's the inclusion of methods on this?
We didn't distinguish between invasive and non-invasive methods. Only 2 studies measure arteriovenous oxygen difference with catheters. They didn't find any effect, but this is a good point. Most of the studies came from non-invasive studies, just taking VO2 max, maximal cardiac output, and they estimate this in the Fick equation. Okay? But still, a lot of the sample size is big and no effect on arteriovenous oxygen difference. Moreover, we found a linear relationship between the effect of training on maximal cardiac output and the effect on VO2 max, a linear relationship. You know, this is not a cause and effect relationship, but it tells something. No? Particularly when we compare with arteriovenous oxygen difference, which was not related to VO2 max at all. Okay? Then we did some subgroup analysis according to different potential confounding factors. One of them, the duration of training. And we saw that maybe studies of more than 3 months of duration, maybe there is an effect on arteriovenous oxygen difference. Below 3 months, no effect at all. Okay? So maybe long-term training is needed to have an effect on arteriovenous oxygen difference, even if this effect is not related at all, according to the meta-analysis, with VO2 max. Okay? Any question about this? No? Okay. So the main increase in VO2 max with training is observed in the first 6 weeks, usually. Of course, it depends on the intensity, duration, so on, but with typical training interventions, we observe the 90% of the effect of VO2 max in the first 6 weeks. So we did an experimental study measuring all the variables that we could measure potentially influencing VO2 max before and after a 6-week training program, endurance training on the bike. Right after the intervention, we removed the increase in blood volume induced by the intervention so that blood volume here was the same as here, so that any effect on VO2 max independent of blood volume should be evident, right? We remove the increase, the effect of training on blood volume, and then we assessed if other variables that were not changed with the phlebotomy have an effect on VO2 max. Is this clear? Yeah?
When you did that, did you control for hematocrit level?
Yes, of course. Hematocrit didn't change.
Okay.
So this training, as is usually observed with endurance training, increased plasma volume and red blood cell volume more or less to the same level.
Okay. Can I just go back to the previous? So the arteriovenous difference is not changed. How is that measured?
Most of the studies, they just measure VO2 max and cardiac output with some respiratory methods. And then with the Fick equation, they estimate, they calculate arteriovenous oxygen difference.
So if my heart output is higher and the muscles see more blood volume and the AV difference stays the same, then the AV exchange would have to be at a higher rate and be more efficient.
The AV, not the oxygen extraction rate, maybe. No? I mean, just taking the variable arteriovenous oxygen difference doesn't matter if we change cardiac output. If the muscles see more blood flow, it may not change. But you are right, maybe some may argue that with higher blood flow to the muscle, something may change to maintain arteriovenous oxygen difference, right?
Yeah.
Something may change in the muscle, right? The thing is that the measurement of oxygen diffusion from the skeletal muscle fibers to the mitochondria, from the capillaries to the mitochondria and skeletal muscle fiber, this cannot be measured yet. And the variables that estimate this, I didn't put it here, but in my opinion are flawed. They depend on oxygen delivery. So in my opinion, we don't know whether oxygen diffusion from skeletal muscle, from the capillaries to skeletal muscle fibers, is a limitant of arteriovenous oxygen difference and VO2 max. But maybe some may think differently. Yeah? No? You do your studies on this, so man, you should. Yeah.
To follow up on Walter's question, David, does anyone express it when they like multiplying out the Fick equation to get QaO2 minus QVO2, and to look at the change in arterial delivery and the change in venous oxygen return, instead of leaving AVO2 difference grouped together? Does anyone do that?
Not to my knowledge.
Where the change is?
No, this could be interesting, just to differentiate between oxygen delivery and extraction in the arteriovenous oxygen difference. To my knowledge, no. But venous oxygen content is usually close to zero in healthy people and in cardiovascular patients. Some studies have measured arteriovenous oxygen difference only in the leg during exercise. In elite endurance athletes, the oxygen extraction is close to 100%, 97%. So the impact of any change in arteriovenous oxygen difference is minor in these athletes. And even in healthy people, oxygen extraction is at least 80% of all the oxygen delivery to the leg. But, what? More questions? No? So we measure blood volume with a method based on carbon monoxide rebreathing. Carbon monoxide links with hemoglobin hemoglobin has a strong affinity for carbon monoxide. So when we measure the change in carboxyhemoglobin before and after giving a given quantity of carbon monoxide, we can calculate total circulating hemoglobin mass. With hemoglobin concentration, we can calculate total blood volume. Okay? The precision of this method is very good. So we are able to use it in typical training interventions with 10 people or so. So as expected, the blood volume was increased by 10% with the training intervention. The same for red blood cell volume and hemoglobin mass. We remove, after the training, the increase in blood volume, the increase in red blood cell volume and hemoglobin mass. And VO2 max, the increase in VO2 max with training was abolished after normalizing blood volume, okay? Despite increases in muscle capillarization and mitochondrial volume density, mitochondrial content in the muscle was largely increased. These increases are typically observed with endurance training, actually the same that some researchers very known in the skeletal muscle field have claimed to determine VO2 max. Okay? So I guess this suggests that the increases in these skeletal muscle adaptations did not determine the increase in VO2 max with training. I guess this is straightforward, right? Maybe someone can argue on the other way around. They say, okay, you remove blood and you abolish the increase in VO2 max with training, all right? But what about vice versa? What about if you infuse blood volume in an untrained state? You should observe an increase in VO2 max, right? This is the part that we need to have the whole story. Okay? Well. So in regression analysis, we observe a strong correlation between changes in red blood cell volume, hemoglobin mass, with VO2 max. This is just regression, so not cause and effect relationships. And then we came up with this figure to summarize, not only from this study, from many other studies, what could be the main adaptations underlying the increase in VO2 max with training. Okay? So with just days or weeks of training, we observe an increase in blood volume. This facilitates venous return to the heart. By means of the Frank-Starling mechanism, the filling of the heart increases, the capacity to pump blood is therefore increased, and we increase stroke volume and cardiac output. Okay? Besides increases in blood volume, in some athletes we observe structural adaptations in the heart. Okay? And this has been claimed for decades that to have a big heart is essential for cardiac output and VO2 max. We don't know if structural adaptations in the heart are independent of blood volume, right? So if we take an endurance athlete with a big heart, what will happen if we normalize blood volume to untrained levels? Blood volume in endurance athletes is at least 30–40% higher than in untrained people. This can be easily investigated, but has never been studied. And what about the peripheral adaptations? They don't matter at all? Well, according to our studies, not much. But maybe you have a different opinion. No? Not at all? Yeah.
So you take the red blood cell volume away, and you say the opposite would be to infuse more blood. But those studies, so I guess it's two parts. Those studies exist.
Uh,
Do they?
in the 70s, with methods, an experimentally controlled study.
Okay.
In the same way. But of course, we know that if we know quite well from anecdotal evidence that blood transfusion increases VO2 max, of course. But to the extent that we would expect if only the increase in cardiac output dependent on blood volume would explain VO2 max, this is the question. If not, maybe peripheral adaptations may play a role.
Okay, so the second part is the study that would convince me would be if you could remove the mitochondrial adaptation. But I don't have a way to do that yet.
There is a study in animals, in rats. They made the rats anemic with a diet, and so mitochondrial function was decreased quite a lot. Function. VO2 max was not affected. What was affected was submaximal performance, endurance performance.
Sure.
So maybe adaptations in the muscle are important for performance, which is most of the time submaximal. Okay? But for VO2 max, the evidence is that at least it's not the primary factor. But we need more evidence.
But I would say experimentally, you can't do the opposite.
Humans.
In humans, yeah. You can't take away mitochondria. You couldn't give cyanide to poison mitochondria.
Well, you can take patients with mitochondrial myopathies or something like this. But
in a pre-post training design, like you can't subtract that adaptation.
To my knowledge, and the ethical committees that I know, this far impossible. But maybe in this country, I don't know. No. I guess not.
I don't think so.
No. But of course. Well, anyway, I will talk about this. So the thing is that it's not only VO2 max, right? VO2 max is an important health marker. It also explains in part endurance performance, but there are other adaptations that maybe are dependent on skeletal muscle adaptations, such as mitochondrial increases in content and function. Okay. One classic, always observed adaptation to endurance training is in substrate utilization. With endurance training, we are able to use more fat and less carbohydrate at a given exercise intensity. This is good because this delays the depletion of glycogen in muscle. We have a limited storage of carbohydrates in our body, only half a kilo for a 70-kilo human. In contrast, fat, we can accumulate fat as we want. Okay? So if increases in mitochondrial content could determine the substrate utilization adaptation that we observe, then we have some meaning there. Okay? So substrate utilization can be measured with gases, just measuring oxygen uptake and CO2 production, and can also be measured in the muscle, taking muscle biopsies, and you put it in a machine, you put oxygen by another pathway, and you measure the oxidative capacity of this piece of muscle. And then you can calculate mitochondrial oxidative capacity and other measures. So this is just to show that with training at a given exercise intensity, the capacity to use fat is increased quite a lot. Okay? So we also know that independently of training, when we compare females with males, we observe that females use more fat than males at a given exercise intensity. Okay? So this could be a model to say, okay, if females have this adaptation per se at a given fitness level, maybe females have higher mitochondrial content and function in their muscle. Okay? So this is what I did. We compared females, healthy females and males with similar VO2 max and performance performance measured as the running velocity at VO2 max. And we took muscle biopsies and compared these muscle biopsies. This is just to show that females use more fat at a given exercise intensity than males. Okay? And this is the result of the machine that I showed you of mitochondrial content in the skeletal muscle of females versus males. So females apparently have higher mitochondrial content, which is parallel by higher capacity to oxidate fatty acids in the skeletal muscle, and also higher capacity to oxidize lactate, right? These functional adaptations were correlated with the increase in mitochondrial content. So maybe everything is related to females having higher mitochondrial content, maybe. So this is what we conclude from this study. So females versus males of similar aerobic capacity have higher fat oxidation, higher mitochondrial volume density, higher fatty acid oxidation, and maybe long endurance performance capacity. Someone may claim that with really long, so with, for instance, ultra endurance events like the triathlon that are maybe more dependent on substrate utilization than on VO2 max, maybe, that maybe females have an advantage. Okay? Maybe. I don't think so at all. Even if, by the way, this year in the World Championship in triathlon, I don't know if some of you followed, but the female that won is a Swiss girl, beat most of the male competitors, most. So the second female was half an hour behind this lady, Daniela Riff, and someone claimed that this is because females may have peripheral adaptations. I don't think this is the case at all. I think we have other evidence of why a female can have a similar performance or better than males. But so anyway, the previous study is just observational evidence. A potential experimental study to see if mitochondrial adaptations, if skeletal muscle adaptations determine adaptations in substrate utilization. Maybe this one that was designed by a student in Copenhagen, in which substrate utilization will be measured separately during arm and leg exercise, before and after a bike training intervention. Okay? So a typical endurance training intervention that will induce adaptations in the leg, but not in the arm. All right? So mitochondrial content and function will be increased in the leg, but not in the arm. So if after the intervention, if we measure an increase fat oxidation during arm exercise, in that there will be no mitochondrial adaptation, then we can claim that mitochondrial adaptations or skeletal muscle adaptations are not necessary for increases in substrate utilization. Okay? It's clear? No? But someone may claim, okay, but then if it is not skeletal muscle adaptations that determine substrate utilization, what else? What else can explain adaptations in substrate utilization? Some idea? No?
If it's not muscle?
If it is not muscle, is there any other typical adaptation to endurance training that can explain that after training we use more fat than carbohydrate?
looking at your slide, I would guess blood donation, so increased plasma volume, but that's cheating.
Uh-huh. But maybe,
I,
yeah.
I can't come out with why that would be, but
So one potential, yeah, is related to this. So one thing for sure is that we will increase blood volume, okay? We will increase VO2 max. So at a given absolute exercise intensity after training, we will be at a lower relative exercise, at a similar relative exercise intensity after training, we will be at a lower absolute exercise intensity after training, all right? So when we do an incremental exercise test until VO2 max, catecholamine secretion increases also more or less linearly. Catecholamines in the circulation facilitates or stimulate carbohydrate utilization. So if after training we are at a lower level of catecholamine, of circulating catecholamine, we could expect that this could have an effect on substrate utilization. Again, this is a speculation, something to test, but has never been tested in 30 years of these training studies. Okay? In contrast, it is given for granted that the skeletal muscle adaptations explain substrate utilization.
Do you consider the adaptation in the respiratory muscles negligible in this case? Because there are going to be some adaptation in the respiratory muscles as well, right?
During this intervention?
Yeah.
We don't think so.
Does that matter?
We don't think so at sea level, adaptations in the respiratory muscle. Maybe, to my knowledge, no, but if the training were in altitude, of course. Okay, so following on this female-male adaptations, do females adapt differently to the same training dose? There is some evidence, very weak by now, that females have an increased mitochondrial expression to a given exercise dose compared with males. In contrast, when we look at central adaptations such as cardiac mass, cardiac size, in this case left ventricular mass, supposedly females adapt much less than males. Apparently the heart size and the heart adaptations in females are limited compared with males. This is based on a study of 5 females and 4 males. This is the best that we have. This is published, not only this in Circulation, in the highest that we have by now. And this could be, if true, a potential explanatory variable of why females, when they are old, they are at a higher risk of many cardiovascular diseases compared with males. Now, but this is just speculative and something that can be easily studied. Okay? So do females adapt differently? Do females adapt more peripherally than males, okay, to a training intervention? So to finish this presentation, is there any question related to this, or comment or critique, whatever? No? Okay. So I finish with a partly related topic, whether it is true that some humans can never adapt to exercise training. So no matter the training intervention, there are some humans, apparently 20%, that will never get a benefit, will never increase some important variables such as VO2 max, for instance. So we know that when we compare elite endurance athletes, females and males, with the normal population, the levels are much, much higher. We never see an untrained subject reaching the level of VO2 max observed in endurance athletes. Never, not even close. So the question may be, Is genetic, do genes, is genetic determining that elite endurance athletes have such a high VO2 max and endurance performance? Some people say yes. Some others say that we need experimental evidence to prove this. Okay? So what we know is that typical training interventions in the study, they induce 10-20% of VO2 max. With the more intense, the more, let's say, heavy training intervention published thus far, we observe a 40% increase in VO2 max in untrained people, okay, in untrained healthy students. And the increase was linear during the whole intervention, 10 weeks. The intervention consisted of 5 days a week, 1 day doing 5 minutes interval training at 95, 100% of VO2 max, 5 minutes intervals, 2 minute rest, I guess, so. And then the other day, 40 minutes running at your maximal running velocity. So this is the Hickson protocol. It's super heavy. You tested this on yourself. This is super heavy to maintain. At the end of the intervention, no one of the, I think only one, of the subjects was willing to continue because the investigators were curious to see, okay, where is the limit? Because we don't see the typical plateau that we observe with training interventions. Can we get to whatever? But the students didn't want to follow. It's not, but maybe if you pay them, you can study it or whatever. So at least that the question is controversial, okay? That we don't know for sure if with training we can get to the level observed in elite athletes in VO2 max. Particularly, we start training when we are young. We train quite a lot of years. But one study in the 90s, a big study, a big population study by some Canadian and US researchers, tried to assess the role of genes on VO2 max responses to training, trainability, they call it. Okay, so they took 130 families and they studied only one single training intervention, endurance training intervention, only one dose of training, okay? And they measured multiple physiological and genetic analysis. This is the training protocol. It was 20 weeks. And the intensity was controlled by a heart rate monitor. So this is the typical moderate training intervention that we see in studies. So regarding the changes that this intervention induced in the subjects, they observed differences in the subjects. Some, they didn't increase at all. Some, they increased quite a lot, 1 liter of oxygen per minute at VO2 max. So someone may claim, okay, so we have clearly a difference in the response to a given training dose. Okay, it's logic to think. But this is a normal distribution, right? So what should we expect? If genetics didn't play any role in the response for a given intervention in VO2 max, what should we expect? Just the same increase in all subjects in VO2 max? Should we expect this? Only one number for the increase in VO2 max? Or not?
No.
No? Why?
Because I would assume that people, even if they're not trained, they still start from different levels. And I would assume if you're naturally high, for whatever reason, that you adapt differently.
The higher your aerobic capacity, maybe you increase less. The higher baseline, maybe. Also because this VO2 max is a biological variable, right? So we should expect a normal distribution of the responses as with any other biological variable. So a normal distribution is what we should expect. Some experts in statistics are now claiming this 20 years after the study, that actually this is what we should expect. But anyway, so they also did some particular analysis, statistical analysis, grouping subjects by families and ranking families by the increase in VO2 max with training. And they claim that the heritability of the training response explain 47% of the increase in VO2 max. Again, this is a normal distribution, all right? Moreover, they did a specific analysis on some genes. We humans, we have more than 20,000 of genes. They selected some that, by the way, they were not related to any physiological variable that we know is related to VO2 max. Like, for instance, stroke volume, blood volume, cardiac output, oxygen delivery, hemoglobin. No one of these genes that they studied here, single nucleotide polymorphins, was related to this physiological variable that we know are related with VO2 max. So again, they found a strong correlation between these genes and the response to VO2 max. Okay, but they used a method in stepwise multiple regression analysis that is it's not good science. Okay, the more variables you put in a stepwise regression model, the higher the probability to find a significant result. So this is one of the limitations, the statistical procedures. The genes that they studied were not related to the physiological variable that we know determine VO2 max. The single training program was also a potential bias because, as reported by the investigators, there were differences in the intensity of the training program, and these differences explain in part the responses, the VO2 max responses. Okay. So the question after this study is, is there really a difference in the interindividual response to a given training dose? Is there differences in how humans respond to a given training dose? For this, we know from pharmacological studies that the best way is to study different doses. And then we can make a dose-response graph. But in this case, we only have one single dose of exercise. No matter what, some researchers claim that 20% of healthy individuals are non-responders. They cannot increase VO2 max with training, based on the heritage study. Okay. There is a long history about this researcher and this thing, but no time today to talk about it. Just for students, I go now. That sometimes, and I say this because I was very ignorant about this. Sometimes the big claims in research do not depend on scientific basis. They do depend on human factors. So taking into account some human factors is essential for, particularly in our field. But I leave it there. Yep.
I got curious to know if those 20% of no responders, would they also increase blood volume?
They didn't measure blood volume.
Is there anything related in the literature say, okay, if you increase VO2 max, they're non-responders because they have any genetics related to blood volume or blood adaptations, or it's because they have peripheral limitations by the genetics that they have as well?
I go now with this study. okay, with blood volume measurements and VO2 max responses.
Sorry, I must have missed it, but you mentioned that they did the score comparing single nucleotide polymorphisms to VO2 max. You mentioned that the SNPs weren't related to any biomarkers to
So we
VO2
try
max.
to
How
address
did they
this with a
deduce that
small
it was
study, okay?
associated with
A
SNPs?
small
Which
physiological
SNPs
study.
related to?
Which what? Sorry,
Just
which?
the SNPs, the
Implementing
single
different
nucleotide
training
polymorphisms.
doses
How do they make that association?
and
related to
measuring specifically
physiology
in
or
non-responders.
physiological biomarkers?
They are related to
So we did
VO2
this
max
with
responses. The typical
Which one did you
6-week
use
training
to make
program
that association?
in healthy subjects.
Which one they use?
5
They-
groups.
They took some from
Each
skeletal
group
muscle
increasing by
studies.
1 the exercise sessions per
But
week.
I recommend you to read that paper and
By the end of the first training intervention, those non-responders, those who do not increase VO2 max according to some established marker, established outcome variable, they repeated the 6-week training intervention, but increasing the training dose. We increased the number of sessions per week. Is clear? So we measured blood volumes, volume mass, and we took also skeletal muscle biopsies. So the response to the first 6-week training intervention gradually increased with more training sessions per week, as we could expect if the training response were dose dependent. Right? Here is the range that we consider non-response, according to the same outcome variables that the heritage study. So then we took the non-responders, so these people here, this here, and they did a second 6-week endurance training intervention, increasing the exercise dose, the training sessions. All of them increased significantly. In this case, it's maximal power output, the same results are observed with VO2 max. Okay. So this study, this is for VO2 max, the same results. This study suggests that non-response to endurance training is not apparent in healthy subjects. So maybe the potential for improving VO2 max is present in all individuals, healthy individuals at least. It's only that we need to implement the right dose. Okay? But still, someone may argue, okay, fine, but still we observe some inter-individual variability in the response to the same dose of exercise. No? Someone may claim this. But before going into this, is there any question for this study? No? It's clear? Yeah.
Did you happen to look at the mitochondrial data in this way?
Yeah, thank you. So we measure the change in mitochondrial content and oxidative capacity, the change in blood volume, and the only thing that we could do is to do correlational analysis. So blood volume and hemoglobin mass explain most of the increase in VO2 mass with training. Changes in mitochondrial content and oxidative capacity, they didn't explain nothing, okay? But correlational analysis. So, Rafael, we can say that if you don't increase blood volume, if you don't increase hemoglobin mass, your VO2 max response is going to be none or limited. Okay. So the following question is, do genetic factors explain the apparent inter-individual variability of phenotypic adaptations such as VO2 max or many others? So for this, one potential study, the one that is usually used, is to have a big sample size study and do some sophisticated statistical analysis. A more straightforward approach may be using twins, monozygotic and dizygotic twins. So these ones share the same genes. These ones not, right? So if we compare the difference between twins in a given variable, for instance, hemoglobin mass, we could expect a higher inter-individual variability in dizygotic compared with monozygotic twins, no? So when we have the same genome, the same genes, we have less variability between twins, right? So after a training intervention, if we are interested in training adaptations, it could be that the difference in the inter-individual variability in hemoglobin mass between monozygotic and dizygotic twins maybe increase, in which case we'll emphasize the role of genetic factors, right? If we share the same genes, we should expect less variability compared with dizygotic twins after a given training intervention. If, on the other hand, we found that this difference is not altered or even reduced, then the role of genetic factors will be de-emphasized. Would you agree with this? Yeah? So this is, again, an easy study. It would just need the collaboration of different centers, and of course, hemoglobin mass is interesting for us, for VO2 max, that there are other variables maybe more interesting in the population, such as glucose tolerance, insulin sensitivity, and many others, that could be studied with this approach. Not only with training, but with the opposite, with detraining, such as bed rest, which is a good intervention, in my opinion, to study detraining, and that I previously used. So thank you for your attention. And you have questions, critiques, or whatever you want to say.
Any questions for Dr. Montero?
Yeah.
From this last part about deep training, once you stop training, which adaptation goes is reduced faster? Is the muscle or is the blood?
Good question. So just tell you just I guess the muscle will be faster because the red blood cells, the increase in red blood cell volume, which is the main determinant of the effect of blood volume on VO2 max, will last at least 1 month, more or less. I guess some adaptations in mitochondrial function and capillarization, they go away much faster than this. So it will be a good way to see the effect of the training of adaptations to the training on VO2 max. By the way, we did some bed training study 1 week, and we didn't observe any effect on VO2 max, even if skeletal muscle capillarization was decreased, but blood volume was maintained. But this is just 1 week. I don't know.
So I've got another question from the web that I think I can understand this one a little bit better. It says, when you're looking at the difference between males and females in their substrate utilization, when they're exercising at the same percentage of VO2 max, could that be actually a difference in relative intensity?
Yes, of course. But in our study, they were matched by VO2 max. So the relative and absolute intensities were the same at the group level. Yep.
David, thanks for your presentation. Can you elaborate on what those human factors might be that you alluded to but didn't talk about?
Good
For
question.
the researchers or for the participants? Which?
No, I mean, when you see a finding in the literature, some established finding, you can guess. I guess before, when I was less innocent than I'm right now, more stupid. So I thought, okay, this is research, this is published, there should be some strong methodology, some peer review. So I've been maybe in my short career on 4 or 5 topics. In all the topics, the human factor is the main driving factor. So once you are a established researcher, in many instances, what I have found is not, the priority is not truth, just to maintain your research going. So imagine I'm supposedly an expert in blood volume. Right now I found in the following study, that blood volume doesn't matter at all for whatever. What I found is that instead of saying, okay, all my life, that all my equipment it's not important. So I'm not going to write a paper saying that my topic is irrelevant for something. I will have a bias to continue supporting in whatever way that my stuff is important and the stuff of others is not important. But I don't want to generalize, just my experience, what I have found, and not in minor things, in strong things, in patients and in serious stuff. So I think the human factor is very important. Human factors, I mean, where the study is published, who published, and you should ask, like in an historical analysis, why they publish this, why. The question to why they publish is always important. But hopefully you are in fields that are less, let's say, the people is more honest. I don't know, maybe I have a bad luck. So.
You mentioned between the males and females that mitochondrial density and function might be different, which lead to changes in fat oxidation. Is that correct?
In what?
Between males and females, it might be determined by mitochondrial density and function. There might be changing the difference in fat oxidation. Is that correct?
We suggest this with an observational study. We want now to prove this experimentally.
If that is the case,
yeah.
What do you think is the driving factor behind that? Why is it that their mitochondria are of greater density, or is it fiber type differences?
Why females have a higher adaptability in mitochondria compared with males? We don't know. I guess there will be molecular mechanisms. Someone may argue that because central adaptations in females are attenuated, maybe during training, the training stimuli is higher in the skeletal muscle of females versus males. Maybe they have less oxygen delivery, less cardiac output, less hemoglobin concentration for sure. Maybe they have a higher stimuli at the skeletal muscle, but this is just speculation. We don't know.
Walter and then John.
About a year ago or so, there was a big kerfuffle in Nature magazine about an endurance gene, where somebody supposedly identified a gene, and if you had it, you were much easier adaptable to endurance training. Do you know about that, and what was that all about?
No, I don't know about it. But only one gene? Explain.
There's a single gene where people argued if you had that, then you're much more adaptable to endurance training than a normal person.
But related to what? To endurance performance, to VO2 Max, in general?
I think to oxygen uptake. I think they were measuring oxygen uptake.
So I don't know about this paper. I would be super interested to look for it.
Really a paper was really more a discussion about it, that somebody had found that and published it somewhere. I'll try to find that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I wanted to ask is, what's the difference if I train at a steady pace and go out there and run 40 minutes 5 days a week, or if I do high intensity interval training, much higher intensity but much shorter? Is there a structural difference in how you adapt to how your VO2 max increases?
I think there are more experts than me in this topic. My opinion on this, according to some meta-analysis, that it doesn't matter too much the intensity, is the volume, the dose that you put. Some studies just with less intensity but more time, they observe the same VO2 max in general. But this is just my opinion. I guess my colleague has a different one.
I would say per unit time, high intensity tends to be more effective, but you can get to the same place maybe over a long period of time. But in the controlled short-term studies, usually equal or greater for the same amount of time.
The energy expenditure, right?
But I would say the caveat there is if you're doing a long continuous run, you're probably putting more time into it. Whereas in studies, we restrict the time to match the time of interval training, which is always shorter. So it's maybe not the typical example of each type.
Why does maximum oxygen capacity go down with aging? What happens in aging? What are the factors that actually make it less?
Cardiac output for sure. In the thick equation, cardiac output goes reduced. This explains most, if not all.
And that is because the heart becomes smaller and the blood volume shrinks, or?
We don't know for sure. That maybe just the stiffness. With aging, we increase the stiffness of the cardiovascular system. If we don't maintain training, maybe it's just the stiffness. For the same blood volume, we get less in the heart, less venous return. But by the way, we don't know that if we were able to maintain the same training dose when we are young and then when we are old, if VO2 max will be maintained. We can put a 70-year-old person to train like an elite athlete. If we were able, no one knows if VO2 max will be to that level.
And the studies where people showed the non-response in terms of there was no increase in oxygen uptake after endurance training, was their performance also not increased, or did they have a higher performance, let's say in a running test, despite the fact that their oxygen uptake didn't increase?
We didn't look for this in the papers, but it's a good question. Maybe you don't need to increase too much VO2 max to increase submaximal performance. To increase to a moderate extent. You want to have the performance of elite endurance athletes. Of course, you need a super high VO2 max, but high VO2 max doesn't explain all. Maybe there are other adaptations that are required.
And so the last question, this woman that you mentioned that won the triathlon world championships and beat many men, how much was she behind the best men?
So she was let me remember, 10-15 minutes just behind the first man, but she bet 90% or more than 90% of the professional men triathletes. This is Daniela Riff, is a Swiss lady. I think I can mention, doesn't matter. So some of my colleagues follow her during their first part of her career. She was a different person. She has the typical female body with some fat percentage or so on. So right now you see to this lady, it looks like a man. Not only, so it looks with very little body fat and different features. Not suggesting anything, but one of his coaches contacted my colleague just to say, okay, we are seeing weird things in the training with Daniela. We see that the bones of the foot broke. They broke the bones when they train. They say, can you look at this? What happened? And my colleague asked, okay, we can do a study, but we need the blood samples. Just the minimum thing that we need is the blood samples. Then, bye-bye. We don't need anything else. Just this. And we know, by the way, not in this case, but we know that the use of male hormones and of EPO and blood transfusion is highly prevalent in endurance athletes, at least in Europe. We have the data. Highly prevalent. And I think this should be mentioned in the universities and everywhere.
I'm just thinking because, the best women in the world in most sports would beat most men. I remember when Florence Griffiths Joyner ran 10.49 seconds, she would have been that year, she would have been the second fastest male in Switzerland. So
but compared with the same elite endurance males,
yeah,
is the
it's still, I mean, the world record for females in the marathon is about 2:15, and there's a lot of professional runners who will run a marathon, they will not be able to run 2:15.
Yeah, but compared with the same competitive level, okay? Compared with the same, so then.
Yeah, I'm talking about professional runners, people that run for money and so on.
Yeah, but if you take endurance athletes who train 40 hours per week, and you have a female who trains apparently 30 hours per week, that female beat all these males, all these professional males with more money, more training, more whatever, this is suspicious.
Yeah, no,
but
I'm sure it's suspicious, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that the best women in the world will be professional athletes in their field that are just not as talented.
of course. But for endurance athletes, we know that the highest VO2 max in females is always like 10 or 12 milliliters minute kilo less than males. So this barrier has never been proven to. So females apparently have a limitation in their VO2 max. So how can a female with 70%, with 70 milliliters minute kilo VO2 max beat males with 85, 90 milliliters minute kilo? And we can continue with more things about it, but.
John. Okay. I've got a question here again from the web, and then I have a personal question. So the question here is that, do you know of a study, or do you know what would happen if an athlete got an IV to acutely increase their plasma volume? So without increasing blood cell content, you're just increasing their plasma volume. Has anybody looked at that, or have you looked at that? Does the VO2 go up with that?
No, there was a meta-analysis and some experimental studies by one Canadian researcher, Warburton, and they saw no effect of just increasing plasma volume on VO2 max. When we increase plasma volume, we increase blood volume, we increase cardiac output, so we should expect higher VO2 max, but on the other hand, we decrease hematocrit. We decrease the oxygen content of blood per unit of volume. So kind of compensates, and apparently VO2 max is not altered. If we just increase the other component, red blood cell volume, of course, VO2 max is increased quite a lot.
Yeah, my personal question was, do you think that that's maybe why you don't see the dependence upon VO2 on central aspects of it, cardiac output? That's why you don't see such a clear delineation, especially at an elite level, between VO2 max and performance?
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably wrong. Because then, then it would flow down to more of the measures that are less influential in determining VO2 max, like VO2 extraction, which potentially then delineate more what's actually causing the absolute changes.
Maybe. Just simply, I don't know about this.
Something you want to.
So the capacity for endurance performance for sure depends on your ability to maintain a given submaximal VO2. The ability to maintain for a prolonged time. So this can be independent of your VO2 max. I guess not. I guess it's mostly dependent on your aerobic capacity, but this can be independent. Yeah.
Graham, I think mine might kind of be in line with what John was saying, but go back to the distillery thing. You said that her VO2 max was 10 to 20 lower than like the top male triathletes. But then you alluded to that there was blood transfusion potentially or something like that. How much would a blood transfusion do you think would improve her VO2 max or her performance capacity? What is the key factor that would improve her performance to that level?
So in triathlon specifically, I cannot tell you for sure, but I can tell you for sure that in cycling, in road cycling, and in marathon running events from marathon of 10,000 marathon longer, you are blood doped, you use blood transfusion, no one else can compete with you, even if you are not the best, just among the top 100 competitors in the field. If you use blood transfusion, no one can compete with you. It's impossible. The increases in performance in the Tour de France, for instance, with just one blood bag, so 200 milliliters of red blood cells, is at least 5%. 5% increase in performance in a race which is decided by less than 1%. It's impossible. You cannot compete without blood doping in the road cycling in Europe. It's just impossible right now. But this is, of course, this came from a lot of evidence from the athletes. By the way, I'm going to show to the students in my class the typical blood doping program that an elite cyclist in the Tour de France top 10 used 5 years ago, published in a scientific journal, and I'm going to show this just for you to know how the real endurance world works.
I just follow up on that because that really, that really surprises me because I think in running I can see that oxygen uptake would be a limiting factor, but
in cycling,
there were times when I was running that I had a very high VO2 max, but I could not keep up with cyclists, with professional cyclists. There's no way. And so I never thought that VO2 max had anything, well, a little bit, but it was really a limiting factor for performance in cycling.
Okay, so I should have specified this. For instance, you are a sprinter in cycling, or you are any type of rider except those who compete to win the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, so long races. VO2 max is mainly a limitation for those who try to win the race, because these races are decided in the mountains. When you climb mountains, in that your VO2 max is critical. You need super high VO2 max, right? You need people with very low body weight and super high cardiac output. Many of the top riders right now came from Colombia. They claim to be at altitude, so they claim that it's because of this that they have high VO2 max. Maybe because the anti-doping agencies in Colombia and these countries are not so good as in Canada or in other countries. Well, this is
So Andy, Marco for the last two.
Okay, start. Quick question, and sort of my days as an athlete, the physiologists were very, very interested in boosting blood volume by non-blood doping means. And they used to play a lot with their hydration status, in particular like dehydration, hyperhydration, kind of toing and throwing. Is there anything to that? Is there sort of what are the mechanisms to increase blood volume besides endurance training, assuming everyone's training?
One colleague now in Norway, he's trying to see with sauna. Sauna is known to increase plasma volume. So we think that the increase in plasma volume lead to some mechanisms that also increase red blood cell volume. So they are trying to measure it with sauna, with the increase in plasma volume, we get to an increased blood volume and increased performance. I have doubts about it and I see some data, not sure. There is another more crazy ways to increase red blood cell volume that some people have tried, but the effects are minimum compared with blood doping. Even altitude training, which is claimed to increase red blood cell volume hemoglobin mass, is established to increase this by the studies. I will show also to the students these studies and some control studies, and why some endurance athletes go all the years to altitude. What is the reason they go to altitude? if it is because of physiological reasons or other reasons. So the effect of altitude training in good physiological studies on hemoglobin mass and red blood cell volume is minimum and highly variable between individuals compared to a single blood transfusion or a single EPO injection, erythropoietin intradermal.
Marco, for the last question.
How much hormone plays a role in adaptations to man and women? So is that a limiting factor for the difference?
Female males, I don't have the data, I cannot tell you. But of course, if erythropoietin, the hormone that regulates red blood cell volume, were lower in females versus males, this would have an effect, of course. Testosterone, of course, skeletal muscle recovery, of course. What I can tell about the hormones is that for endurance performance, at least they have a big impact, a super big impact. So just as an anecdote, I have a friend of a friend who was just kind of the typical guy who go to the gym to increase muscle mass, 36 years old, and then all of a sudden he decided to run long distance, to run 10,000, marathon and so on. So in a matter of 2 years, using erythropoietin and testosterone hormones, he got to 30 minutes in 10,000 meters, 30 minutes for a strong guy, incredible. So almost world record in many countries. And in marathon, in half marathon, close to 1 hour and 7 minutes. So this is just anecdotal evidence, but we know more. The effects of hormones, the fact that they have discovered some hormones that they determine so much performance is something wonderful. If for some diseases we will have such knowledge, would be great. So maybe much of exercise physiology for endurance performance we know already. No? We know 2 hormones that control mostly everything. So maybe we don't need so much laboratories and so much things.
All right, let's
No.
thank Dr. Montero one more time.
Next week's speaker will be Delisle Paulet, who will be talking about the mechanical logic of quadrupedal gait. See you next week.